The title of my talk is The Myths of Disruption, How Established Firms Are Adapting to the Digital Age. And this is work that I've written up. It will come out in Harvard Business Review at the end of this year. So you are getting a sort of sneak preview on a piece of work that I'm publishing in Harvard Business Review. And we're going to be dividing it into two halves. One is about the choices companies are making as they try to adapt to a digital world or a disruptive world. And then the second part is more about the internal, so almost like organizational systems that are used to enable that adaptation. So I will start with a very simple observation, which is that executives around the world in all industries worry about disruption. This piece of data was taken by Russell Reynolds, I think it was called, and they basically asked chief executives across industries. In every industry, more than 50% of chief executives said that they were being disrupted already. I want to discuss this threat of disruption in a particular way, and I'm going to deliberately be a little bit of a contrarian. In other words, I'm going to say something which is different to what many people say. So here's an opening quote for you. There is ample evidence that today's technologies will tear apart banking as we now know it and create an entirely new financial system. The point is this. The quote comes from 1996, when the first wave of the internet revolution happened. If you remember, that was when the internet was first a possibility and all sorts of things were happening. Amazon was created, Google was created, and so forth. And everyone was anticipating that the banking industry would change like many other industries. And in some respects, the banking industry has changed. Of course, there's many fintech companies out there. But in another respect, the banking industry has not changed that much. Because if I wander down a main city street in London, and I'm guessing if you take whatever street you're living in, you look at the main high street banks, the main retail banks, my guess is it's mostly the same banks as existed 20 or 30 years ago. In other words, even while change has happened, the big incumbent companies are continuing to dominate. And that, of course, is very different to, for example, the photography industry, where companies like Kodak and Polaroid have completely disappeared. And my point is that there is a range of industries out there which have been affected in very, very different ways. And I think it's really important that we are thoughtful about the reasons why some industries have been completely disrupted and the incumbents have actually gone bankrupt, whereas other industries, we've actually seen the incumbent companies fighting back quite well. Myth number one is that every industry is being disrupted by digital technology. And it turns out that simply isn't true. It is absolutely true that the digital media tech industries are being disrupted. That's the story that we read about every day, about the Googles and the Amazons of this world. And it's also true that the retail sector is being disrupted. A lot of retail companies have indeed gone bankrupt. But if I look at the automotive industry, with the one exception of Tesla, it's incredibly resilient. Consumer products, industrial products, engineering, mining, minerals, chemicals, energy. These are important parts of the economy, but of course, they're not the ones that we talk about all the time. All of those parts of the economy are incredibly resilient. So that's the first point, that in fact, true creative destruction in terms of companies going bankrupt is actually only a little subset of the economy being affected in that way. Myth number two is that disruption happens quickly. And we perpetuate that myth because we see occasional stories like Nokia going bankrupt very quickly and Blockbuster going bankrupt very quickly. But actually, when you look at most other industries, and I'm including here biotechnology, I'm including what's happened to the retail banking industry, I'm including the energy industry. If you think about how long it has taken for things like electric vehicles to take off. If you look at even blockchain technology, we think of blockchain as new, but it's been with us for 10 years now. all of these things are actually disrupting us very slowly, if at all. And that's important because, of course, it means incumbent companies have much more time to respond than is historically thought of. And then the third point I want to make is that there's a myth that established firms are kind of dinosaurs. You've all heard this myth. There's a book's been written about elephants not being able to learn how to dance and so forth. It turns out that if there's one kind of key finding that comes out of my research here, it is that these established firms are actually getting much smarter about reinventing themselves. And they're doing it in a lot of different ways. They are creating new digital offerings themselves. They are becoming leaner and faster. They are re-engineering their internal processes. They are creating, through these various accelerators and incubators and so forth, all sorts of vehicles that allow them to buy into these digital startups. They're aggressively buying up startup companies. And of course, they're doing a lot of merging and other things in order to consolidate their positions. So look, I am deliberately, as I say, taking a contrarian view, because so much of what you read today is everything's being disrupted. I want to say, let's look at the data. Let's actually figure out whether there's also a story about inertia and incumbent companies maintaining their position. And I think in some ways, particularly those of you who've worked for large established companies, this is a kind of a good news story, because these predictions of disruption are actually overstated.
IPADE. The world calls.